My little brother woke me up at night and said we need to leave right now. So, we did. The hand on my shoulder was shaking me so hard my teeth rattled, and when I opened my eyes, Caleb's face was inches from mine in the darkness. His eyes were huge and terrified in a way I'd never seen before, not even when he broke his arm falling out of the treehouse when he was 8. "Avery, we have to go right now," he whispered, his voice cracking on every word. "I heard them talking downstairs and they're going to do something really bad and we can't be here when they wake up." I was still half asleep, my brain struggling to process why my 13-year-old brother was in my room at what my clock said was 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday night. I started to tell him to go back to bed, that whatever he heard was probably just a nightmare, but then I saw what he was holding. Our dad's hunting knife, the one he kept locked in the gun safe, was gripped in Caleb's shaking hand with dried blood on the blade. My whole body went cold and I sat up so fast I nearly headbutted him. "Where did you get that? Is that blood? Caleb, what's going on?" He was already moving to my closet, pulling out my backpack and stuffing random clothes into it with movements that were jerky and panicked. "I'll explain when we're safe, but we have maybe an hour before they notice, and if we're still here when they wake up, we're not going to be okay." His voice had this flat certainty that scared me more than the knife or the blood or any of it, because Caleb had always been the dramatic one, the kid who cried when we watched sad movies and got anxious about everything. Seeing him this calm while saying something this terrifying meant whatever he'd seen or heard had broken something fundamental in him. I threw off my blankets and grabbed the backpack from him, my hands shaking as I tried to think clearly through the adrenaline suddenly flooding my system. "Tell me right now what happened or I'm not going anywhere." Caleb's face crumpled for just a second before he forced it back into that scary, calm mask. I woke up to use the bathroom and I heard Mom and Dad talking in the kitchen. They didn't know I was awake. They were talking about how we're getting too old, how we ask too many questions now, how the people they work for said it's time to cut loose ends before we figure things out. His voice dropped even lower and I had to lean in to hear him. "Mom said your name first, Avery. She said you've been asking about why we never visit grandparents or why we don't have any baby pictures from before we moved here. Dad said we could handle it this weekend when we go on that camping trip they've been planning. Make it look like an accident. 2 kids drowned in the lake. Tragic story. Happens all the time." I stared at him, my brain refusing to process what he was saying because parents don't talk about killing their own children. Parents argue about bills and curfews and whose turn it is to do dishes. They don't plan murders. But then I remembered things that had never quite made sense. How we'd moved to this town when I was 6 and Caleb was 3, and Mom and Dad always said we couldn't contact anyone from before because there had been a situation with dangerous people. How they homeschooled us and never let us have friends over or go to other kids' houses. How Dad would disappear for days sometimes and come back with duffel bags full of cash that Mom would count at the kitchen table while we were supposed to be sleeping. How I'd found fake IDs in the garage last year with our parents' faces but different names, and when I asked about them, Dad had gotten this look on his face that made me never bring it up again. All the weird pieces that I'd always told myself had reasonable explanations suddenly rearranged into a picture that made my stomach hurt. "The knife," I whispered, pointing at it with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. "Why do you have Dad's knife and why is there blood on it?" Caleb's eyes filled with tears, but his voice stayed steady. "I went to the gun safe to get something, anything we could use to protect ourselves if they tried to stop us from leaving, but it was already open and the knife was just sitting there on Dad's workbench with blood on it, fresh blood that was still wet. And there was a wallet next to it with someone's ID and credit cards. Someone I've never seen before. Someone who's probably dead now because of what our parents did tonight." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve and thrust my backpack at me. "We can process this later. We can figure out what to do about all of it later. But right now, we have to leave this house before they wake up and realize we know too much." Everything in me wanted to argue, to say this was insane, to wake up our parents and demand an explanation. But looking at my little brother holding a bloody knife in my bedroom in the middle of the night, I couldn't make myself believe there was a reasonable explanation that would make this okay. I grabbed the backpack and started shoving actual useful things into it instead of the random items Caleb had thrown in. Phone charger, my emergency cash from the drawer where I kept birthday money, a jacket, my laptop, because it had all my schoolwork, and I couldn't think clearly enough to know what we'd need. Caleb went to his room and came back with his own backpack stuffed with clothes and his tablet, and I could see he'd been planning this more carefully than his panic suggested, because he also had a first aid kit and bottles of water and granola bars from the kitchen. "How are we leaving?" I asked quietly, creeping toward my bedroom door to listen for any sounds from downstairs. "Dad keeps the car keys on him and the spare set is in their bedroom. We can't get to them without walking right past their door." Caleb pulled something from his pocket that made my breath catch. He had a full set of car keys that I didn't recognize, attached to a keychain with someone else's initials. "These were with the wallet," Caleb said, and his voice had gone completely flat. "I'm guessing they belong to whoever Dad killed tonight. There's a car parked 2 houses down that I've never seen before. A blue sedan. I checked and these keys unlock it. We can take that car and be gone before anyone even notices." The casual way he said, "whoever Dad killed tonight," made something crack inside my chest because my 13-year-old brother shouldn't know how to talk about murder like it was just another item on a to-do list. I took the keys from him with numb fingers, and we moved through the dark house like ghosts, every creak of the floorboards making my heart stop. I could hear Dad snoring from the master bedroom and see the faint light under the door that meant Mom was probably reading in bed like she did every night. Normal sounds from normal parents who were apparently planning to kill us this weekend and make it look like an accident. We made it to the front door and I slowly turned the deadbolt, praying it wouldn't make the clicking sound it usually did. The bolt slid free with barely a whisper, and I eased the door open. the hinges mercifully silent because Dad had oiled them just last week. We slipped out into the October night air that was cold enough to make me wish I'd grabbed a better jacket, and I pulled the door closed behind us with the slowest, most careful movement of my life. Then we were running across the lawn toward the street, our backpacks bouncing against our shoulders, heading for a blue sedan parked under a streetlight 2 houses down that belonged to someone who was probably dead. I clicked the unlock button and the car chirped once, way too loud in the sleeping neighborhood, and we threw our bags in the back and jumped into the front seats. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, but then the engine turned over and we were pulling away from the curb, leaving the only home I remembered behind us. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes before my brain started working clearly enough to form an actual plan. We couldn't just drive forever. We had maybe $300 between us and a tank of gas that was showing half full. We didn't have real IDs because our parents had always said they'd get us driver's licenses when we were older, which I now realized meant they never wanted us to have official documentation. We couldn't go to the police because what would we say? Our parents were talking about killing us but didn't actually do anything yet, and also we stole a car that might belong to a murder victim. That would get us sent straight back home where Mom and Dad would have a convenient explanation for everything, and we'd be trapped until that camping trip this weekend. Caleb was staring out the window with his arms wrapped around himself, and in the glow from the dashboard, he looked even younger than 13. Just a scared kid who'd had to grow up way too fast in the last few hours. "We need to go somewhere they won't think to look for us," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And we need to find someone who can actually help us. Someone with authority who won't just send us back." Caleb was quiet for a long moment before he pulled out his tablet. Before we left, I took pictures of everything I found. The knife, the wallet, the fake IDs in the garage, the duffel bags of cash in the basement that I found last month when you were at the dentist. I've been documenting things for a while because I kept noticing weird stuff and I thought maybe I was paranoid, but I wanted evidence in case I wasn't. He showed me his photo gallery and my stomach turned as I scrolled through dozens of images. Stacks of $100 bills wrapped in paper bands, multiple driver's licenses with our parents' faces and different names and addresses, handwritten notes in Dad's writing with names and addresses and dollar amounts, that bloody knife laid out on the workbench like some kind of terrible still life. "There's more," Caleb said quietly. "I found a box in the attic 3 weeks ago when I was looking for Christmas decorations early because I wanted to surprise Mom. It had newspaper clippings about missing people, maybe 15 or 20 different articles from the past decade. Some of them were from cities we lived in before we moved here, from when I was too young to remember. And someone had highlighted certain details in each article about the people who disappeared, their jobs, their families, their bank accounts. I took pictures of every single one." He handed me the tablet and I pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed grocery store so I could look at the photos properly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely swipe through the images, but what I was seeing made my blood run cold. Missing person after missing person, each one highlighted with notes in Dad's handwriting about assets and opportunities and logistics. "Oh my God," I whispered, because the implications were crashing over me like a wave. "Caleb, I think our parents are serial killers, or hired killers or something. This isn't just about them wanting to kill us. This is what they do. This is their job." Caleb nodded and his eyes were wet, but his voice stayed steady. "I know. I've known for like a month, but I didn't want to believe it, and I couldn't tell you because I thought maybe I was crazy. But tonight, when I heard them talking about making our deaths look like an accident, exactly the way some of those articles described other people's deaths, I knew I wasn't crazy. And I knew we had to leave right now, or we'd end up as clippings in someone else's box." I hugged him across the center console, this kid who'd been carrying this terrible knowledge alone for weeks while I'd been completely oblivious, worried about normal things like passing my homeschool tests and whether I'd ever get to go to actual college. We sat in that parking lot for maybe 10 minutes while I tried to figure out our next move, and that's when headlights swept across the car from behind us. I looked in the rearview mirror and my heart stopped because I recognized our dad's truck pulling into the parking lot, moving slowly like it was searching for something. "They know we're gone," I said, my voice coming out high and panicked. "How do they know already? We've only been gone half an hour." But then I remembered the car we were in, the dead man's car, and I realized Dad had probably planned to move it tonight or dispose of it somehow. He'd have noticed it was gone the moment he went outside. I threw the car into drive and gunned it toward the parking lot exit, not even caring about being careful anymore. Dad's truck accelerated behind us, and I could see him clearly in my mirror. His face set in this expression I'd never seen before, cold and focused and nothing like the dad who made pancakes on Sunday mornings. I ran a red light turning onto the main road and another car had to swerve to avoid us, the driver laying on the horn. Caleb had his seatbelt clutched in both hands and his eyes squeezed shut, and I felt terrible for scaring him, but I didn't know what else to do. Dad's truck stayed right behind us, easily keeping pace, and I realized with growing horror that he wasn't trying to stop us by ramming us or cutting us off. He was hurting us, pushing us away from the downtown area toward the industrial district where there wouldn't be witnesses. Every turn I tried to make, he anticipated, blocking me with his truck until my only option was to keep going straight toward the dark, empty warehouses at the edge of town. My phone rang from where I'd thrown it in the cup holder and I could see Mom's name on the screen, but I didn't answer because what would be the point? She'd try to talk us into pulling over, into trusting them, and I couldn't let Caleb hear her voice because he was barely holding it together as it was. The road dead-ended at an old shipping facility that had been closed for years, chain-link fence surrounding crumbling concrete buildings. I slammed on the brakes and the car skidded to a stop maybe 20 feet from the fence, and Dad's truck pulled up behind us, blocking our only escape route. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Dad's door opened and he stepped out. And in the glow of the headlights, I could see he was holding something that made my mouth go dry. His hunting rifle, the one he used for deer season, was cradled in his arms like this was just another day at the range. He walked toward our car slowly, almost casually, and I locked all the doors even though I knew it wouldn't matter. A rifle could punch through car windows like they were paper. Caleb was crying now, these quiet hitching breaths, and I reached over to grab his hand. "Whatever happens," I whispered, "I'm so proud of you for trying to save us. You're the bravest person I know." Dad reached my window and tapped on it with the barrel of the rifle, and my whole body went rigid with terror. His voice came muffled through the glass. "Avery, open the door. Let's talk about this like adults." The word adults coming from a man pointing a gun at his teenage daughter would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. I stayed frozen, trying to think of any possible way out of this situation. The car was blocked front and back. Dad had a rifle and probably his handgun too. We had no weapons except Caleb's knife and no training in how to use it. My phone buzzed with another call from Mom, and then a text message appeared on the screen. "We can explain everything. Please just come home." I almost laughed because what possible explanation could make any of this okay? But then Caleb made a small sound and pointed through the windshield, and I saw headlights approaching from a side road I hadn't noticed, coming fast toward the shipping facility. Dad saw them too, and his expression shifted from cold focus to something like concern. He stepped away from our car and raised the rifle, pointing it toward the approaching vehicle. The headlights resolved into a white van with government plates, and it skidded to a stop maybe 30 feet away, and I counted 4 doors opening simultaneously. People in FBI jackets poured out with weapons drawn and voices shouting commands I could barely process. "Drop the weapon! Federal agents! Hands where we can see them!" Dad's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion and anger, and finally resignation. He lowered the rifle slowly and set it on the ground, then raised his hands. One of the agents rushed forward to secure him while others fanned out to check the perimeter, and I just sat there gripping the steering wheel and trying to understand how the FBI had possibly known where to find us. One agent approached our car, a woman maybe 40 years old with kind eyes and her badge held up high. She tapped gently on my window, and I finally unlocked the door with shaking hands. "Avery Cross?" she asked, and I nodded mutely. "I'm Special Agent Renee Caldwell with the FBI. You and your brother are safe now. Your parents are in custody, and they're not going to hurt you. I need you to turn off the car and step out slowly with your hands visible." I did what she said, my legs barely supporting my weight as I stumbled out of the car. Caleb scrambled out of the passenger side and ran around to grab me, and we stood there in the headlights holding each other while federal agents swarmed around us. Agent Caldwell kept talking in this gentle, steady voice, explaining that they'd been investigating our parents for 6 months and had warrants for their arrest on multiple charges, including murder, fraud, and racketeering. They'd been monitoring the house with surveillance equipment, waiting to gather enough evidence for charges that would stick. When they saw us leave in the victim's car at 3 a.m. with our father in pursuit, they'd scrambled a team immediately because they knew our lives were in danger. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice coming out hoarse and broken. "How long have you been watching us live in that house with them while knowing what they were?" Agent Caldwell's expression tightened with something that might have been guilt. "We've had surveillance on your parents for 6 months, but we only confirmed your existence 3 months ago. They'd hidden you very carefully, homeschooled you, kept you off all official records. We weren't even sure you were real until we got visual confirmation. Once we knew about you, we started working on a plan to extract you safely. But these operations take time to coordinate, and we had to wait for the right moment when we could prove immediate danger. Tonight, when we saw your father chase you with a rifle, we had all the justification we needed." She paused and looked at both of us carefully. "Did either of you know what your parents did for a living? Did they ever involve you in their activities?" I shook my head violently, and Caleb pulled out his tablet with shaking hands. "I figured it out recently," he said quietly. "I have photos of evidence I found in the house. I didn't know what to do with it because I was scared if I went to police they'd send us back home and our parents would know I talked. But I documented everything in case we got a chance to escape and find someone who'd believe us." He pulled up the photos and handed the tablet to Agent Caldwell, and I watched her face change as she scrolled through the images. The knife, the wallet, the cash, the newspaper clippings, all of Caleb's careful documentation from the past month. "This is incredibly helpful," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that sounded like sadness. "You're a very brave young man. Both of you are. Most people wouldn't have survived what you went through tonight." She called over another agent and showed him the tablet, and they conferred in low voices while I tried to process that this was actually real, that we were actually safe, that the FBI had been watching our house for months and we'd never known. Another vehicle arrived, this one an unmarked sedan, and a man in his 50s got out wearing a suit that looked expensive even in the dark. He showed his badge to the agents securing the perimeter and walked directly to Agent Caldwell. They spoke quietly for a moment, and then he turned to look at Caleb and me with an expression that was hard to read. "I'm Assistant Director Gerald Monroe," he said, his voice formal but not unkind. "I've been leading the investigation into your parents' activities. We have a lot to discuss, but first we need to get you somewhere safe and warm where we can conduct proper interviews. You're not in any trouble. I want to be very clear about that. You're victims and witnesses, and we're going to do everything we can to support you through this process. But we do need to ask you questions about what you saw and heard tonight, and anything else you might know about your parents' activities." I looked over at where Dad was being loaded into the back of an FBI vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back, and I felt this strange disconnect, because he still looked like my dad. Still had the same face that had read me bedtime stories when I was little and taught me how to ride a bike and smiled at me over birthday cakes. How could that person be the same person who just chased us with a rifle and planned to kill us on a camping trip? How could both versions exist in the same body? Mom was nowhere in sight, and I asked Agent Caldwell where she was. She's been secured at your house, Caldwell said quietly. She didn't pursue you like your father did, but she's equally culpable in everything they've done. You'll both give statements about what happened tonight, and then we'll work on finding you a safe place to stay while this investigation proceeds. Do either of you have any other family we can contact? Grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone who might be able to take care of you? Caleb and I looked at each other and I realized we had no idea if we even had other family. Our parents had always said everyone from before was either dead or dangerous, but I now understood that was probably just another lie to keep us isolated. We don't know, I admitted. They told us we didn't have any family, that it was just the four of us against the world. I don't even know if Cross is our real last name or if that's another fake identity. Assistant Director Monroe's jaw tightened and he exchanged a look with Agent Caldwell that I couldn't interpret. We'll figure that out, he said. Our priority right now is your immediate safety and well-being. Let's get you out of this parking lot and somewhere more comfortable. They loaded us into Agent Caldwell's vehicle, a plain sedan that smelled like coffee and fast food, and we drove back toward town with 2 other FBI vehicles following us. I watched the shipping facility disappear in the side mirror and tried to process that less than 2 hours ago I'd been asleep in my bed, normal and safe, and now everything I thought I knew about my life was revealed to be a lie. The FBI field office was in a building downtown that looked like every other office building from the outside, but inside it was all security checkpoints and badge readers and agents moving purposefully through fluorescent-lit hallways. Agent Caldwell took us to a conference room with a table and chairs and a window that looked out over the parking lot. There was a camera mounted in the corner that she gestured to apologetically. Everything that's said in this room will be recorded for evidentiary purposes, she explained. But I want you to know that you're not suspects. You're minors who were kept in isolation by your parents and are now helping us understand the full scope of what they've done. Anything you tell us will be used to build our case against them, not against you. Do you understand? We both nodded, and she left us alone for maybe 5 minutes while she went to get water and snacks from somewhere. The silence in that room was oppressive, and Caleb hadn't let go of my hand since we'd gotten out of the car. Are we going to be okay? He asked quietly, and I didn't know how to answer because I had no idea what okay even looked like anymore. We're alive, I finally said. That's more than we would have been by this weekend. Everything else we can figure out. Agent Caldwell came back with bottles of water and a bag of vending machine snacks, and Assistant Director Monroe followed her with a laptop and folders full of documents. They sat across from us and Monroe opened one of the folders, pulling out photos that he laid carefully on the table. I recognized some of them immediately. Surveillance photos of our house and our parents entering and leaving at various times, but there were other photos that made my stomach turn. Crime scene photos of bodies and blood and evidence markers. I'm going to show you some difficult things, Monroe said, his voice gentle despite the horrible images. But I need you to understand the full scope of what your parents have been doing so you can help us ensure justice for all their victims. Over the next hour, Monroe walked us through their investigation into our parents' activities. They weren't serial killers in the traditional sense. They were contract killers who worked for organized crime families and occasionally wealthy individuals who wanted problems eliminated. The FBI had connected them to at least 18 murders over the past decade across 6 different states, though they suspected the real number was much higher. Most of the victims were other criminals, people involved in drugs or money laundering who'd become liabilities to their organizations. But some were innocent people in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnesses who'd seen too much, spouses who'd become inconvenient. Our parents had moved from city to city, changing identities each time, always staying just ahead of law enforcement until this investigation finally caught up with them. The documents your brother photographed are incredibly valuable, Monroe said, gesturing to Caleb's tablet, which was now connected to his laptop. These newspaper clippings match up with several of our cold cases, and his documentation of the blood evidence and wallet from tonight's victim will help us close at least one open murder investigation. I felt sick hearing him talk about murders and victims in clinical terms, while looking at my little brother's photos documenting our father's crimes. Who were we before this? I asked, surprising myself with the question. You said they hid us carefully. Does that mean we had other names? Other lives? Monroe and Caldwell exchanged another look, and then Monroe pulled out a different folder. Inside were birth certificates and photos of 2 small children I didn't recognize at first. The girl looked maybe 5, with dark curly hair and a gap-toothed smile. The boy was around 2, chubby-cheeked and laughing at something off camera. It took me a long moment to realize I was looking at Caleb and myself from before I could remember. Your names were originally Kennedy and Julian Reed, Monroe said quietly. Your biological parents were Michael and Patricia Reed, and they died in what was ruled a murder-suicide when you were 6 and 3. Your father allegedly killed your mother and then himself, leaving you orphaned. The room spun and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Allegedly? I repeated, focusing on that one word because I couldn't process anything else he'd just said. Monroe nodded grimly. We now believe that murder-suicide was actually a contract killing carried out by the people you know as your parents. They were hired to eliminate your biological parents, who were witnesses in a federal trial against a crime family. After completing the job, they took you and your brother, rather than leaving you to go into the foster system where someone might eventually figure out what really happened. They've been raising you under false identities ever since, moving whenever they thought someone was getting too close to discovering the truth. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The people who'd raised me, who I'd called mom and dad for my entire remembered life, had murdered my real parents, and then just taken me and Caleb like we were spoils of war. We'd been living with our parents' killers for 11 years and never knew it. Caleb made this small broken sound, and I turned to see tears streaming down his face. So they were never really our parents at all, he whispered. They were just the people who killed our parents and stole us. Agent Caldwell reached across the table like she wanted to take his hand, but stopped herself. I know this is devastating information to receive, she said gently. And we have counselors standing by who specialize in helping children process trauma, but I want you to understand that what they did to you, keeping you isolated and raising you under false pretenses, that was criminal regardless of how they treated you day to day. Even if they fed you and clothed you and seemed to care about you, they had no right to take you from your biological family and no right to keep you hidden from the world. You were kidnapped victims this entire time. You just didn't know it. The words kidnapped victims echoed in my head, and I tried to reconcile them with my memories of childhood. Birthday parties and homeschool lessons and family movie nights, all of it built on top of a foundation of murder and theft. Do we have other family? I asked, because I needed to know if there was anyone out there who'd been looking for us, anyone who'd missed Kennedy and Julian Reed. Monroe pulled out more documents, and I saw family trees and contact information, and my heart started beating faster. Your biological father, Michael, was an only child, but your biological mother, Patricia, had 2 siblings, both still living. Her sister, Rachel Gardner, lives in Oregon, and her brother, Thomas Barrett, lives in New Hampshire. We've already been in contact with them as part of our investigation, and they've been searching for you since you disappeared 11 years ago. They never believed the foster system story your kidnappers spread. They knew something was wrong, but they had no evidence and no way to prove what happened to you. He showed us photos of a woman in her 40s with curly hair like mine, and a man maybe 50 with Caleb's same nose and chin. Our aunt and uncle, actual blood relatives who'd been looking for us while we'd been living 40 minutes away from our aunt for the past 5 years, never knowing we had family who wanted us. The interview continued for another 2 hours, as they asked us questions about our daily lives, about things we'd seen or overheard, about any visitors or unusual activities we'd noticed. Caleb described finding the box of newspaper clippings and showed them every photo he'd taken. I told them about the fake IDs in the garage and the duffel bags of cash and the times Dad had come home with injuries he'd brushed off as work accidents. They recorded everything carefully and took copies of all of Caleb's photos. It was past 6 in the morning by the time they finally said we could take a break, and I realized we'd been awake for over 24 hours. Agent Caldwell took us to a different room that had 2 cots set up with blankets and pillows, and she explained this was where they sometimes let witnesses rest during long investigations. Someone will be right outside the door, she said gently. You're completely safe here. Try to get some sleep and we'll talk more when you wake up. But I couldn't sleep even though exhaustion was pulling at my bones. I laid on one cot while Caleb curled up on the other, and we stared at each other in the dim light filtering through the window blinds. Are you mad at me for waking you up? Caleb asked eventually, his voice small and scared. For making us run and causing all this? I reached across the space between the cots to grab his hand. You saved our lives, I said firmly. If you hadn't heard them talking, if you hadn't been brave enough to document everything and wake me up, we'd probably be dead this weekend. I'm not mad. I'm grateful. You're the reason we're still alive, he cried then. These quiet sobs that shook his whole body, and I got up and climbed onto his cot so I could hold him. We'd been through something no kids should ever have to experience, and we'd survived it together because my little brother had been brave enough to act when it mattered most. Eventually, his breathing evened out and he fell asleep against my shoulder, and I held him and stared at the ceiling and tried to process that our entire lives had been a lie. Someone knocked softly on the door around noon, and Agent Caldwell came in carrying paper bags that smelled like burgers and fries. We ate mechanically while she explained what would happen next. Our Aunt Rachel was flying in from Oregon that evening and had already been cleared to take custody of us temporarily while the investigation proceeded. There would be more interviews and eventually probably testimony in court if the case went to trial, but for now the priority was getting us somewhere stable and safe where we could start processing everything that had happened. Your aunt has been in touch with a trauma counselor who works with children in situations like yours, Caldwell explained. She understands you'll need intensive support, and she's committed to making sure you get whatever help you need. She's also been in contact with your Uncle Thomas, and they're working together to figure out the best long-term arrangement for both of you. I tried to imagine living with an aunt I'd never met, in a state I'd never been to, starting a completely new life at 17. Caleb would have to start real school for the first time instead of being homeschooled, learn to make friends and navigate social situations he'd been isolated from his entire life. The FBI brought in a counselor that afternoon, a woman named Dr. Sharon Kramer who specialized in helping children who'd experienced severe trauma. She sat with us in a different conference room and didn't push us to talk about anything we weren't ready for. Instead, she taught us breathing exercises for when the panic attacks hit and gave us worksheets about identifying feelings and coping mechanisms. What you've been through is extraordinarily traumatic, she said gently, and there's no timeline for healing from something like this. You might feel okay one moment and completely overwhelmed the next, and both reactions are normal and valid. The important thing is that you're safe now and you have people who care about helping you recover. She gave us her phone number and said we could call anytime we needed to talk, even if it was 3 in the morning and we were having nightmares. Having that concrete lifeline helped more than I expected, knowing there was someone who specialized in exactly what we were going through. Our Aunt Rachel arrived at the FBI office around 7 that evening, and the moment I saw her walk through the door, I started crying. She looked so much like the woman in the photos Monroe had shown us. Patricia Reed, our biological mother who'd been murdered 11 years ago. She had the same curly dark hair and the same green eyes and the same gentle expression, and it was like seeing a ghost of someone I'd never consciously known but somehow still missed. Rachel saw us and immediately started crying too, crossing the room to wrap both of us in a hug that smelled like lavender and felt safer than anything I'd experienced in years. "Oh my God," she kept saying, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, I can't believe it's really you. Kennedy, Julian, I've been searching for you for so long." Hearing our original names from someone who'd known us before the kidnapping felt surreal, like being introduced to people I should already know but couldn't quite remember. Rachel sat with us for over an hour just talking, showing us photos on her phone of our biological parents and telling us stories we'd never heard. She showed us pictures of me as a baby being held by Patricia and videos of Caleb's second birthday party where everyone sang and he'd smashed his face into the cake. "Your mom was my best friend," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "When she died, when they said Michael killed her and then himself, I knew something was wrong. Patricia would have never let that happen without fighting, and Michael adored her. He would never have hurt her. But the police said all the evidence pointed to murder-suicide, and I was just a grieving sister looking for someone to blame. Then you both disappeared from foster care and the trail went cold." She explained how she'd hired private investigators and pushed the police to keep the case open, but without evidence there was nothing they could do. She'd never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, and now here we were, alive and safe but so different from the babies she'd known. The FBI arranged for us to stay in a hotel that night with Rachel and 2 agents stationed in the room next door for security. They were concerned that other members of the criminal organizations our kidnappers worked for might try to target us as witnesses, so we'd need protection until everyone involved was in custody. Rachel ordered room service and we ate pizza while watching mindless TV, trying to act like this was normal even though nothing about it was normal. Around 10 p.m., Caleb asked the question I'd been avoiding thinking about. What happens to them? To the people who took us? Rachel's expression hardened in a way that made her look less like our gentle aunt and more like someone who'd spent 11 years being angry. "They'll be charged with kidnapping, multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and probably a dozen other crimes," she said. "The FBI has enough evidence to put them away for life even without your testimony. But with what you've provided, there's no chance they'll ever see freedom again." I should have felt relieved hearing that, but instead I just felt empty. The people who'd raised me were going to prison forever for crimes including murdering my real parents, and I should have been happy about that. But part of me kept remembering the dad who'd taught me to read, and the mom who'd bandaged my scraped knees, and my brain couldn't reconcile those memories with the reality of what they'd done. "Is it wrong that I'm sad?" I asked quietly, and Rachel immediately shook her head. "Grief doesn't follow logical rules," she said gently. "You can grieve the parents you thought you had while also being angry at the people they actually were. Both feelings can be true at the same time, and you're allowed to be confused and conflicted about all of this because your situation is impossibly complicated." She told us about the therapy and support groups she'd already researched, about schools in Oregon that had experience with students who'd been through trauma, about all the plans she'd been making for years just in case she ever found us. We stayed in that hotel for 3 days while the FBI continued their investigation, and Rachel worked out logistics for taking us back to Oregon. Our Uncle Thomas flew in on the second day, a quiet man with kind eyes who cried when he met us and couldn't stop apologizing for not finding us sooner. "I should have pushed harder," he kept saying. "I should have known they weren't really dead. I should have kept looking." But Rachel told him firmly that he'd done everything possible, and the people who took us had been professionals at hiding. On the 3rd day, Agent Caldwell came to tell us they'd found the body of the man whose car we'd driven, whose wallet and keys Caleb had taken from Dad's workbench. He'd been a low-level drug dealer who'd stolen from the wrong people, and those people had hired our father to make him disappear. The timeline suggested he'd been killed maybe an hour before Caleb woke me up, which meant if Caleb hadn't heard that conversation and acted immediately, we'd have been asleep when Dad came back to move the evidence. The preliminary hearing for our kidnappers happened a week after our escape, and Rachel asked if we wanted to attend. I said yes immediately because I needed to see them one more time, needed to confirm in my own eyes that they were really being held accountable. We sat in the gallery with Rachel and Uncle Thomas, and I watched as the people I'd called Mom and Dad were led into the courtroom in orange jumpsuits with their hands cuffed. They looked smaller somehow, diminished, nothing like the powerful, frightening figures from that parking lot. The prosecutor read the charges, and it took almost 5 minutes to get through them all. 36 counts total, including 18 murders, 2 kidnappings, fraud, weapons charges, and conspiracy. Our father never looked at us, just stared straight ahead with no expression. But our mother turned, and her eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for just a second I saw something that might have been genuine grief. Then the moment passed, and her face went blank, and she turned back to face the judge. The judge denied bail, citing the defendants as severe flight risks with the resources and skills to disappear completely, and ordered them held in federal custody pending trial. Walking out of that courtroom knowing they couldn't hurt us anymore, couldn't reach us or manipulate us or plan our deaths, felt like breathing for the first time in days. We flew to Oregon the next day, 3 tickets on a commercial airline with Agent Caldwell accompanying us for security. Rachel lived in a small town outside Portland, in a house that felt enormous after years in our isolated home. She had a guest room ready for me and had converted her office into a bedroom for Caleb, both rooms decorated with welcome signs and new clothes in our sizes. "I've been buying things for years," she admitted, showing us the closet full of clothes in various sizes. "Every birthday and Christmas I'd buy presents for the ages you would have been, hoping someday I'd get to give them to you." Starting therapy was hard because Dr. Melissa Torres, the counselor Rachel had found, didn't let me hide from any of the difficult feelings. She made me talk about the good memories of the people who'd raised me and acknowledge that I could miss them while also being angry about what they'd done. She helped Caleb process his guilt about not figuring things out sooner, about all the signs he'd missed before that last month. We went to therapy separately and together, sometimes with Rachel joining us to work on building new family relationships. Enrolling in actual school was terrifying after years of homeschooling, but the principal and counselors had been briefed on our situation and worked to make the transition as smooth as possible. Caleb started 8th grade and I started senior year, both of us completely overwhelmed by the crowds and noise and social dynamics we'd never learned to navigate. But slowly, week by week, it got easier. I made friends with a girl in my English class who invited me to study groups and didn't ask intrusive questions about where I'd come from. Caleb joined the robotics club and found other kids who were quiet and awkward and accepted him without demanding explanations. The trial was scheduled for 8 months after our escape, and the prosecutors warned us it would be difficult to sit through. They were right. For 3 weeks, we listened to testimony about all the murders our kidnappers had committed, saw crime scene photos and evidence, and heard the family members of victims describe their losses. Some days I had to leave the courtroom because it was too much, too overwhelming to reconcile these horrific crimes with the people who'd packed my lunches and helped me with homework. The prosecution presented Caleb's photos as evidence, and his documentation of that final night was crucial in establishing premeditation and intent. When it was our turn to testify, I stood in front of the courtroom and described hearing Caleb's voice in the dark, seeing the bloody knife, making the decision to run. I described the chase and the parking lot and the moment Dad had pointed a rifle at us. I answered every question the prosecutor asked and didn't look at the defense table where our kidnappers sat with their attorneys. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Our father was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Our mother got the same. Standing in that courtroom listening to the judge hand down those sentences, I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served. The people who'd murdered my biological parents and kidnapped us and planned to kill us were going to prison forever. But it didn't feel like victory. It just felt like the end of something terrible that should never have happened in the first place. We went home to Rachel's house and she made us dinner and we sat around the table, this weird little makeshift family trying to figure out how to be normal. Uncle Thomas had moved to Oregon to be closer to us and came over for dinner twice a week. We were slowly learning our original names, responding to Kennedy and Julian instead of Avery and Caleb, though some days I still forgot and answered to the wrong name. A year after our escape, Rachel helped us plan a trip to visit our biological parents' graves. They were buried in New Hampshire where they'd lived before being murdered, and Rachel and Thomas had maintained the gravesite for 11 years. We stood in the cemetery and I looked at the names carved in stone, Patricia Reed and Michael Reed, and tried to feel some connection to these people I'd never consciously known. "I'm sorry I don't remember you," I said quietly, and Rachel squeezed my shoulder. "They loved you so much," she said. "Everything they did was to protect you and keep you safe, and they died trying to do the right thing. They would be so proud of who you've become." We left flowers and took pictures and drove back to Oregon, and for the first time since that night when Caleb woke me up, I felt like maybe we were going to be okay. Not fixed, because you don't fix this kind of trauma. But okay. Surviving. Learning to live with the complicated grief of losing parents twice. Once to murder, and once to the truth. Now it's been 2 years since that night, and Caleb and I are different people than we were when we ran. He's 15 now and thriving in high school, talking about wanting to study forensic science because of his experience documenting evidence. I'm 19 and finishing my first year of college, studying psychology because I want to understand trauma and help other people who've been through impossible situations. We still have bad days where the anxiety hits and we can't function, days when we have nightmares about the parking lot and the rifle and what would have happened if Caleb hadn't been brave enough to wake me up. But we also have good days where we laugh with Rachel and Thomas and our growing circle of friends, where we feel safe and loved and like we might actually have normal futures ahead of us. The people who took us, who we called Mom and Dad for 11 years, are locked away and can't hurt anyone ever again. And Kennedy and Julian Reed, the children who were stolen and hidden, are finally home. Thanks for hanging out till the end. If you want more stories, make sure to subscribe and leave your take below.